So much for joining us today. We're so glad to be here in conversation with Jared Anderson, Tony Michael, Chris Plein, and of course, all of you participants. On behalf of the WVU Center for Community Engagement, we're so glad that you're joining us for this academic community engagement, or as we like to call it, ACE event. So my name is Denis Scott. I'm an associate professor, extension specialist, also the assistant director for academic engagement with the center. I'm here with other members of the Center for Community Engagement, including Dr. Christy Wood-Turner, assistant dean and director of the CCE, Melissa Calabrese, the academic community engagement coordinator, and Mason Arbogast, the civic and volunteer coordinator. I also really want to take a moment to thank Dina Tiles, the Dean of Extension and Engagement, for supporting all of these efforts, as this is now our third ACE series event. So we're going to be here for about the next hour and a half to share some best practices, case studies, ask questions about how we might be able to nurture inclusive, equitable, and more holistic ways of thinking and learning and collaborating. I'll lead us off with a few questions, and from there, I'll really encourage you to engage in whatever way feels right to you. You can raise your emoji hand to speak. You can send Melissa a direct message if you have a question that you want to ask, but I don't want your name to be associated with it. That will give you a little bit of an element of privacy. So the conversation will be recorded, however, and shared with registered participants. I'm just going to say, in terms of the flow today, I hope that we can all just feel okay with some moments of quiet and reflection. There might be moments where we're taking a pause to really let some of these comments and concepts sink in. Each of our positions and relationships are all part of this healthy ecosystem within our community we're trying to promote. So it's okay if we have a pause in this conversation to think about what we're sharing, how it's resonating with you before we move on to another question. So let me introduce the three panelists today. We're grateful to spend the morning with these three great speakers. We're here today, first of all, with Chris Plein. Chris is a professor of public administration and Eberly professor of outstanding public service. Here at WVU, he served as chair of the Department of Public Administration. He also served as an assistant and associate dean for Eberly College. Also, he holds an appointment as an adjunct specialist in community and family development with WVU Extension. Chris's area of research specialty is public policy formation and implementation. His research concentrates on social and health policy, rural development, and community transition, as well as higher education, outreach, and engagement. He's been active in service to West Virginia and its communities. He served as a citizen member of West Virginia Legislature's Legislative Intern Committee, served as a gubernatorial appointee to West Virginia's high-risk insurance program, and has assisted policymakers in both the executive and legislative branches with various policy program studies. He has also served on the boards of nonprofit organizations and is currently on the board of directors for the Allegheny Highlands chapter of the American Red Cross. So thank you, Chris, for joining us.
Thanks, Dennis. I appreciate it.
We're also here this morning with Jared Anderson, who is a land use attorney. After earning his BA from WVU, Jared worked as a GIS specialist for an engineering firm in Virginia. Later, he moved out west to attend the University of Hawaii, where he obtained a Master of Urban and Regional Planning. In 2007, he moved back to Virginia to become the planning director for the town of Chincoteague. While there, he was responsible for all the day-to-day planning activities, including a complete revision of the town's comprehensive plan. Thank you, Jared. So last but not least, I would like to introduce the Family and Community Development Program Unit Director, Dr. David Tony Michael, known as Tony throughout the day. His time with Extension has given him the unique opportunity to see how different programs function. He believes that a more comprehensive, positive change can only be made through collaborations, seeking the true essence of WVU Extension's power. Tony understands that when every program is connected, residents get more direct and better access to knowledge, education, and guidance. They can improve their lives at work and home. As both a faculty member and program leader for the Institute for Labor Studies and Research, Tony has worked to develop and cultivate better, more productive relationships between labor and business management. He's also been very effective at building community partnerships around diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. So welcome all the guests and all the panelists. We'll just start off with a broad general question to really hear about some success stories that you've experienced or witnessed with these forms of equitable community collaborations. I'll just throw it out to the panel. And Chris, maybe if you'd like to go first with talking about some of these success stories that you've witnessed over the years.
I appreciate it, Dennis. I'm actually going to turn the question around just a little bit. And that is, I think that we learn a lot from experiences where maybe we have fallen short, or maybe we haven't taken into account all factors. When we talk about best practices, we know what the ideals are. But oftentimes experiences teaches us lessons that even with our best intentions, we realize that we could have been more sensitive to engagement, more sensitive to equitable participation. And so I'll share with you a story right now from about, well, many years ago, we'll just say that. And I was involved in an outreach project associated with West Virginia University. And the project was called the Community Design Team. And the community design team is a really rich program. And like every program, we had to get it started. And in our very first visits that we did to communities, we sought to be very focused on engaging individuals, getting all the stakeholders to the table. But we learned some lessons the hard way. We learned lessons that it's really important to be proactive and reach out to a community before you visit and align expectations. It's very important to listen to who's requesting your presence in their community and why. And to ask hard questions about, have other folks been involved in the planning for your visit to a community? Are the issues and areas of concern that you're identifying inclusive and broad? We went into those communities with the absolute best intentions. And we went in with our hats of expertise on. We went in with our desire to help out. We went in with our preconceived notions of rural West Virginia, you know, which is so deeply embedded in studies of Appalachia and West Virginia's history, and you name it. And so we went in with some assumptions. We went in with best intentions. And we had a rough, rocky road for some of those very first visits that we had. Because we went in, we're here to help, we're here to assist you. And we realized that perhaps we needed to ask some harder questions about who are we engaging? What assumptions did we have going into the community? Were we overprescribing? Those who asked us to arrive and to visit, did they have assumptions and motivations that didn't reflect the wide array of stakeholders? And so in those first visits that we had many, many, many years ago, let's just say late in the last century, that was a laugh, I hope. Okay, but you know, the thing is that we step back and say, what did we learn from this experience? And I would say that the community design team, as it moved forward into the 2000s, really learned from those experiences. Much more effort focused on engaging communities before we actually visited the community to help them do planning charrettes, to think about economic development strategies or what have you. A lot of checking of our own assumptions as team members, and also a focus on making certain that we aligned expectations for the engagement that we're involved in. And I'll be more than happy to return to some of these subjects, but I wanted to start off with a story, not so much about best practices, but by learning by doing and seeking to improve. And I'll turn it over to Jared or to Tony right now.
Well, yeah. So from the question that Dennis posed, one thing popped up into my mind, and it may not be as apparent at first, but one of the success stories that we've had in sort of the land use and community development realm has just been getting jurisdictions to start talking to each other, to start planning together. And that's been a really as a planner who, before I went to law school, I was a community planner, and to see some of the communities that either it's a municipality within a county, or two counties, or two municipalities within a county work together during some of these planning processes. The comprehensive plan stuff that we work on is looking 10 to 15 years into the future. And so many times these communities were either doing completely separate plans, or one was doing a plan and one was not really planning for the future. And so when we observed and when we tried to sort of facilitate discussion between these two different jurisdictions that are very close, if not surrounded by one another, to plan for their future, their collective future, that was those have been the planning processes and the work that I've done that has been most meaningful. To see elected officials in various jurisdictions sort of sit down together and say, yeah, it's not, there's no magical line here between the county and the town. We're dealing with the same water, we're dealing with the same types of soils, we're dealing with the same transportation issues, the same housing issues. And from the 10,000 foot view, it seems that totally makes sense. But West Virginia, as some of you may know, some of you may not know, it's a series of lots of little towns and villages and hollers, and we all have a very strong identity to place. And so sometimes those discussions at first are very difficult because there's just been sort of a generational, like, that town's over there and we're across the creek and this is our community. And so when we've been able to facilitate that discussion, and then to sort of, as the plan has progressed and as they sort of start to make it a day-to-day thing where they're working together, man, that is such a great thing to see. And that's something that we try to facilitate when there are those situations that are apparent to us. So that's been something that I would consider a success, especially here in West Virginia, where we have very limited resources. And so this sort of coming together from the various communities, I think, is very important. And I think in a lot of ways, it makes a lot of sense. So that's what I have.
And those are great perspectives. Anyone here could probably provide a laundry list of things that have gone well and things that have not, right? You sometimes hear people talk about, to reference Chris's discussion, where he talked about learning, right? You may have heard fail forward. Well, we don't want you to fail forward in communities, okay? Because we don't want you to fail. Don't go in with, as Chris pointed out, prescribed expectations. And as Jared was talking about, listening to the various perspectives, right? Thinking about who needs to be at the table. We'll provide a specific example. In 2013, in Huntington, West Virginia, they had a new mayor come in, Mayor Steve Williams. Some of you may have worked with him or have seen him in the news, for instance. He was just on CNN a couple of weeks ago. Good representative for West Virginia, I think, and a great leader for Huntington. Well, he inherited, when he took office, a very challenging situation where Dennis referenced my background in labor and management relations, where labor and management were not working well together. Some people have referred to West Virginia as a judicial hellhole in the past. Huntington was similar to that with labor management relations, very difficult. We went in without any kind of prescribed notion of what we were going to come out with, other than we needed to, number one, listen to what the concerns of the constituents were and be clear and transparent that we were going to be talking to multiple people to try to find out really what the landscape was and ultimately find out what the issues were. But we weren't focused on what was wrong. We were trying to focus on what needed to go right. What did they see as an ideal situation between labor and management, for instance? We'll fast forward 10 years. Okay. So 10 years ago, we started that process and we're still working in it. It's not that we haven't had lots of successes along the way, because Huntington has. Huntington actually has a minimum wage of $15 for any employee for the city. Only town I'm aware of in West Virginia that has that. They are a city that has dealt with opioid crisis for sure. And by having strong labor management relations within the city has really helped them learn through that process, because they were able to recognize the challenges that the workforce had. Think about the stress that first responders were under whenever they were either on the police side or EMS side, right? Where they were responding to all these calls, this crisis there, and they've worked to come through that. The employees are embedded in the fabric of that community now, and it in many ways is a thriving community. It's grown over those last 10 years, and we've helped facilitate that by bringing the people together, think about what they have in common and what their common goals were. So all that is to say, by facilitating discussions, whatever the situation may be, right? When we talk about conflict management and resolution, or maybe I should say when I talk about it, it's an area that I work in. One of the things that we talk about is that the penultimate approach is collaboration. But collaboration takes trust, right? Number one, it takes time. And then it takes the ability to focus on the things that we can achieve together rather than the individualized, if you will, goals that we might have.
Mhm.
So I'll stop there so we can address some other questions and share some other examples.
Well, I think this is great. Thank you for that, Tony, because I think it leads into the next question I wanted to consider. And we did elicit feedback from registrants, what they were interested in learning. So we'll try to tie some of those questions in and condense some of the similar topics. But Tony, you talked a little bit about the concept, we don't want people to fail forward. So what do we want folks who are newer to this work to do? So if you all had advice for faculty or practitioners who are new to this work, what would be some key points of advice to consider before getting started?
You know, Dennis, you were so kind to send us some of these questions beforehand. It gave us an opportunity to reflect on this. And so I thought about this, and you know, let me offer a couple of observations very quick, and then I'll turn to Jared and Tony. But I think one of the things as we get started in all of this, and I already kind of foreshadowed that in my conversations about learning by doing and, you know, with our best intentions. But I think one of the things that we have to do is we need to be aware of assumptions that we have. And we need to be aware of the assumptions that we have, not only of the communities, the place-based communities that we're talking about so far, but also the individuals that we work with. What sort of assumptions do we bring? What sort of preconceptions do we bring? You know, and all of us in this room, this virtual room, we're working not only with communities as we might traditionally have thought about communities, you know, of places and spaces, but we're also thinking about communities in terms of communities of practice, of like-minded practitioners and professionals, communities of affiliation, belonging, identity. Many of us are increasingly working also in the virtual space, working collaboratively across the country with others on projects. And so I think we need to be aware of our own assumptions that we bring. and the assumptions that we might have as faculty members, the assumptions that we might have given our own backgrounds and perspectives. And I think we also need to be cognizant of the assumptions that others might have with us. And so one is for me, is to be aware of assumptions that both you might have in engagement and those that you're working with, not for, but working with in engagement. Okay, and so I think that's an important thing. Relatedly, I think it's very important for us to be wary of imagined past and imagined futures. So oftentimes we have an imagined idea of what the past was for a community or for an institution. And we also might have an imagined future in mind that's perhaps idealistic, perhaps prescriptive. And so we need to think about, the fact that reality is much more complex than we might construct it to be based upon our preferences for a remembered past or a desired future. So that's one thing that I would also emphasize. And then a third point that I thought about was be mindful of time and space. And I think this relates to both what Jared and Tony have been talking about in their success stories. If you think about what both Jared and Tony mentioned, is that they talked very specifically about time and space, though maybe not directly. They talked about the fact that their efforts have had a very specific scope and they've played out over time. I think it's very important that when we engage with others, that we're realistic in our expectations about the scope of our work and about the time frame that will be delivered in, or the time frame that we will be engaged with. And so those are my three quick little observations. Be aware of assumptions, be wary of imagined past and desired futures, and be mindful of time and space.
Penny, I'll let you go first or second.
Sure, no problem. But it's always hard to follow Chris. He's so eloquent. So one of the things that I would recommend to everyone, and I know that we all come from sort of different perspectives and backgrounds. One of the things that my experience with faculty who are interested in this space, especially if they're getting started, is that they look first to the data, right? If you're going to be applying for a grant or something like that, you're going to need that data. And data absolutely matters, but it is not the only thing that matters. And it may not matter at all to the community. The community, West Virginia, is dead last in a lot of health metrics, for instance, right? Does that matter to the communities that we're dead last? I mean, that's what the data says. But what matters to them, right? Their lifestyle matters more to them, or maybe their traditions matter more to them than whatever that data metric happens to be. So when we go into a community, I absolutely encourage you, think about the data that you need to inform your work, but understand that the data is not going to be your selling point with the community. Talk to the community about their perspectives, right? Before you come in and share yours or what the data metrics happen to point out to. So maybe a better way to phrase that is to listen first. I've mentioned that before. Can't articulate it enough. Listen first, and then discuss later. Dennis and I do some work together, and he has said this before. You have, I guess the advice that he got was you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so you should listen twice as much as you talk. So it's good advice. The other thing is build relationships. That is really where your growth opportunity is going to be. Build relationships now for things that you might not be able to anticipate will be important in the future. So reach out to colleagues that are doing some of this work. I will say, I can put it in the chat, but if you haven't seen the recent WVU Today articles that reference service, WVU service, one of them focused on how WVU is the fabric in communities, and the one that just was released today talks about community development. Mm-hmm. Those are great, I think, broad perspectives about the work that's happening across the university, West Virginia University. but they only scratch the surface of all the work that's actually being done. So I would say, look to those areas where you have interest, contact people that are leading in those areas. And if you're not sure who, just reach out to someone. I will say that you've got a great resource here in the Center for Community Engagement, whether you are a WVU faculty member, or you are a community partner, or you work at another institution, they can be a resource for the efforts that you have interest in. So I'll just go with two, which is, think about your data, but make sure that you're listening to the community about their perspectives, and then build those relationships and connect with colleagues who are doing that work.
I love what Chris and Tony have provided, and in my notes, I had scribbled down listen, 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 and so I think that's for many of us, we're excited about a project, we're excited to work with individuals or groups, and we want to get out there and do a lot of good, but sometimes the best way to get the data that you're looking for is to just listen. And I don't think that there's any place where it's more rich and fruitful to what I call is talk story. I learned about this in Hawaii. People would talk story, and I can get more out of 30 minutes of just informal discussions with folks than I could 3 hours of Googling stuff about that same community. And so the listening part definitely, I would say, is up there in terms of being successful. Here, actively listening to hear what individuals, organizations, groups, local government are really saying, and to ask questions and to clarify and make sure that you're understanding really what they're saying. And then the other thing for faculty that are looking to get into this kind of work is to come into it with an open mind, be flexible, because, and Chris, I think you hit on this very well, is that we really got to be able to not be too rigid in what we're hoping to do. We might have deliverables, we might have a grant that specifies a certain end goal, but how we get there, hopefully there's some flexibility, and hopefully we can develop that flexibility with the community, however that community is defined. And so open mind and flexibility. When I first started this job, I probably was a little too rigid in how attorney, I've got to, I've got to look at the statute, I've got to do this, I've got to do this. And what I've learned after doing it for many years is that that's not the best way for me to work. And so I've learned over the years and trial and error that anytime we're going into a new community, a new environment, is that I've got to have an open mind. And what worked in community A very well may not work at all in community B. And so just be mindful of the fact that what may look like exactly the same community, again, as you define it, they may not be exactly the same at all. And in fact, they're probably not. And as Chris said, it's complex. So that open-mindedness is really essential to getting into community work and community development. I think it's just it's essential, and it can be very fruitful.
Thanks, Jared. I love that concept of talking story. So we'll have to talk some story more about that later offline, and hear about some of your experiences there in Hawaii. And all of you were foreshadowing this somewhat, and I see some great comments in the chat by Melissa and Margaret and others that are linking to resources. And apologies to everyone if I got anyone's bios a little bit twisted, because each of you have such long work histories and so many different connections to communities around the states and even around the country. So I know that you've used lots of different resources and institutional structures to help you with your work over the years, and some of the links are already pointing to that. But would you like to talk a little bit more about any specific institutional structures or resources that could be supportive for folks trying to get into this work?
Let me, if you don't mind, let me jump in on that. So Jared was talking about telling stories, so I'm going to tell a story right now. Okay, so, but for the last, Tony, you can help me out here too, and Dennis as well. For the last year and a half or so, or maybe the last 14 months or so, West Virginia University has been involved in a project called the Extension Collaborative on Immunization, Teaching, and Engagement. That's a mouthful. We'll just call it EXCITE, okay? And so the EXCITE project is funded by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and by the National Institutes for Food and Agriculture, which is USDA's funding agency, if you will, for extension work. And West Virginia University is one of a number of universities that are involved in this work across the country, which is aimed at vaccine education and outreach. And the focus is primarily on adult vaccination. And West Virginia University is working with West Virginia State University in our state to collaborate and to promote education, outreach, and knowledge about vaccines. Our work was first initiated because of the COVID crisis, but is now expanded to different areas of adult vaccination. So, one institutional support is looking at national initiatives where we can learn from our peers across the country. The other is anchoring new innovative projects within existing institutional arrangements. So here's where my story comes in. Tony, Dennis, and I know that so much of the leadership of our program comes from an extension colleague of ours in Wyoming County, and her name is Stephanie Lusk. And one of the aspects of our project has been to actually hold information sessions in local communities in the southern part of our state. So back in August, Stephanie organized a session in one of our small communities in McDowell County. And I told Stephanie that I'd be more than happy to come down and lend a hand, or at least not get in the way. And so I arrived in this little town in McDowell County, and because I have an adjunct appointment with Extension, I had an Extension shirt on for the day. And I walked into a community center in a very remote part of McDowell County. And I was the first person, if you will, from Extension to arrive. I got there just a little bit early. And I walked to the door of this community center, and someone said, "Oh, Extension is here." And immediately I felt welcomed. They did not know who I was. And of course, that impression of Extension was because folks like Stephanie and others working in our communities have helped to promote West Virginia University and have delivered on the programming that's been developed. And so a big takeaway from me in that day is, one, I was glad I was wearing my shirt, but really the big takeaway for me that day is that we have institutions like Extension that can help to promote and connect us to community. And through the hard work of a lot of folks, there's a lot of goodwill involved in that. You know, in our project, the EXCITE project, we work with Extension services across the United States. And one of the things that we've gotten to be known for in West Virginia is the sense that we've done a lot of work in face-to-face, community-based efforts with this, that we are considered, quote unquote, trusted intermediaries. And it's about those relationships that we have. And so if I'm a faculty member outside of Extension, knowing that Extension is an institution that I can work with really helps. And not only is there credibility and support there, but I want to emphasize that Extension agents and Extension specialists can also help us in that data gathering process of understanding the communities that we're working with, understanding the context and dynamics. So that's a story. Jared, probably not as good as one of yours on Hawaii, but that's a story. And if you don't mind, Tony, would you mind picking up the thread on that a little bit? Because you've been involved so much in this.
Sure. I appreciate you recognizing extension. It's certainly one of the points that I would be remiss if I didn't make. So you made it for me. I mean, it truly is. We have faculty and staff in every county of this state. So wherever you're going to be thinking about working, it doesn't hurt to just reach out to your local extension office and make the connection with the faculty member that's there. One of the things that we recognize, at least on the faculty side, is that this kind of work has to be embedded in the plan of work, in our evaluation process. And so by reaching out to that other faculty member, you're starting to develop this collaboration and building those relationships that we referenced earlier. When there's some question about how do I actually ultimately pull all of this work together and be able to report it, whether that's for faculty report or maybe it's for community needs. I think the CCE and this series, for instance, is a great resource that you can use because they're trying to help us understand this community engaged scholarship effort. And that is one of the things that will be a very useful tool for everyone going forward. The other thing I would suggest is if you value this work, if you believe that this is the kind of engaged scholarship or effort that you're looking for, and you want community partners and you want equitable contributions, you have to be an advocate for it. That means talking to your peers, talking to your administrators, talking to those that you may supervise about the importance of this, and then live it. Next time you're thinking about, I've got, a trip to Clay County coming up, pick up the phone and call the extension agent, or just look at Extension's website, click on Clay County, it'll give you the contact list, and say, hey, I'm coming into the community. Do you have a chance to meet, or is there anything that you would like me to see while I'm there? Obviously, introduce yourself a little bit. But that's the kind of thing that we have to actually advance ourselves. So in other words, we have to be the early adopters. And I know we're not in that phase now, but we have to be the ones who push for this and say, this is valuable and important. That will help the institutional structure allocate appropriate resources, because for instance, travel is challenging right now at times, but there's a benefit of Zoom. But understand, not everyone in your community is going to be available for Zoom or have Zoom opportunities. The other piece of this is recognizing that communities don't operate on an 8:15 to 4:45 schedule or 9 to 5. Okay. Communities are 24/7. And if you talk to one of our faculty members embedded in the community, you'll probably find that they have evening meetings. So if you're going to reach community partners, recognize that you might need more than just a lunch hour connection. You might need to see what's going on in the community and then make yourself available to stop by for something in the evening. Whether it's a 4-H club meeting that you want to check out because you're curious about youth development in the community, or maybe it's a city council meeting where you want to connect with someone. Those are some things that come to mind there.
Yeah, and give a shout out to Extension. I had a specific county comprehensive plan that we were working on in Roane County, and the extension agent there was just fantastic and really was the ears on the ground and sort of was able to produce resources and get me connected with individuals and groups. And so Extension absolutely is a resource in the work that we do. Public health has been a resource for us. Public administration has been a resource for us. Landscape architecture, the Davis School have been resources for us in the past, and we work with individuals in those schools and colleges. With the work that I do primarily in the communities, it's a comprehensive plan. It's so, as the name implies, we're looking at various aspects of a community as a sort of looking 10 to 15 years into the future And so we've got by law to look at housing and infrastructure and public services and education and health and all those kind of things. And sometimes, jokingly, us planners say we're the jack of all trades and master of nothing type deal, because we work in we kind of ebb and flow in various disciplines. And so it's been vital for at least the work that I've done in West Virginia to pull from these resources. If a community is talking about something that is very much along the lines of public safety and public health and the opioid, I reached out to people in the School of Pharmacy. I reached out to people in public health. I reached out to people in the medical school, because I didn't know. I needed to educate myself. I needed to get those people involved in certain plans as best they could, understanding that they've got their own work to do. But I think in some ways, at least with the work that I've been able to do, I'm blessed to have the resources of this institution, at least if nothing else, to bounce ideas off of, or to get resources, the latest resources on opioid and substance abuse prevention and those kind of things. It's been just such a treasure trove of information and resources that I can then sort of package in the comprehensive plan in a way that makes sense for folks, and then to make those connections directly to the community in some cases has been really great. And so I've always viewed WVU, extension, the various departments as a huge resource for the community work that we've been doing in the clinic for the last 10 years. And so, all this stuff, this whole webinar is geared towards things that I believe are very important for community development. And so,
extension, helps us with our engagement and outreach, and is an essential partner. And to use the phrase this morning from the WVU today, extension is out there helping to catalyze community development. And extension, I also would say, is important because it helps with inReach at WVU. And with inReach, I mean, it's making connections across departments. It's helping us to connect to other departments and to other colleges as well. And Dennis, I think probably a follow-up question would be for much of this is, how do we build these connections that Jared is talking about, so they're not idiosyncratic, but they're more structured? And of course, your center is doing part of that. There are other initiatives across campus that are trying to create these connections between these incredible assets that we have at WVU, whether it's extension, whether it's our health sciences. And it's great to see so many people from health sciences. And from engineering, you name it. I know that in my home college, the Eberly College, one of the things that we're doing is we've helped to sponsor what's called the Eberly Community Health Collaborative, which actually partners with extension and with health sciences. Also, we've had involvement from the Reed School of Journalism and Media, and we've had involvement from some other colleges as well. And one of the things that group is doing is that in 2023, over the next 2 months, they're going to be having a series of basically information sessions on what various programs and faculty are doing around the topic of the structural and social determinants of health. And as we know, increasingly we're looking at community well-being and individual health through the lens of the social determinants of health. And that really is a linking thing for many of us. And so, again, finding common ground, like Jared was talking about, and also finding ways to bridge things becomes important in helping newer faculty as well as more established faculty find those resources, those connections, and those opportunities. Just wanted to get that in there, Dennis.
No, that's great. Thanks for all of those really specific examples of ways that we can work collaboratively across colleges and campuses. But look, I would be remiss if I didn't try to keep it real and nitty gritty today, because we are talking about how we work in communities, right? So far we've been really talking about the benefits to us internally. right? We've been talking about structures that support our work as faculty and practitioners in communities. So, and talking about stories, there's sort of an old story or saying in the community development field that faculty often get publications, grants, awards, recognition, and promotion and tenure for their research in the field, but participants get coffee and donuts. What does that mean? They're invited to community meetings or focus groups and things like that. So what I'm getting at is we've talked a little bit about how to support faculty work. What do you think our community partners get out of this work? And are there some specific examples where this partnership has been mutually beneficial? Because that's really key to community engaged scholarship. It has to be a mutually beneficial partnership for communities as well as university partners and researchers.
So, Dennis, we started the conversation off today, talking about communities of place, but we also have what are communities of practice. And folks that we're working with collaboratively to jointly identify problems and to address them. And so one of the things that I know that increasingly in higher education, we talk about the importance of collaboration, whether it's in a community of practice, whether it's with affiliation groups, whether it's with a particular place or space. And a lot of times this focuses in on the technical expertise and our knowledge expertise that we can provide to communities, however defined. I know that right now in the extension field, but also across the higher education landscape, we are looking and trying to encourage more inclusive collaboration, not only in the dissemination of results, but framing those research questions, framing those essential issues, engaging folks in collaborative program assessment. And so in a time where we're thinking more about engagement and its intersection with inclusion, equity, diversity, and social justice, these questions become really important. I just want to get started with that because there's a book that just came out that might be helpful for some folks to look at. It's called Grassroots Engagement and Social Justice Through Cooperative Extension. It's an edited volume. I want to pop it into the chat box, but I think it helps to start to frame some of those questions about how do we partner and what are the benefits for all of us inclusively. And so I'm going to start there, and then I'm going to let the other folks talk, and then I might come back also with another observation, if that's okay. Your silence, Dennis, is telling me it's okay.
Yeah, I'm trying not to step on the speakers, and I just
I'm just teasing with you. We're having fun, right?
Hear from you all. Yeah,
okay.
For sure. Thank you.
So, obviously, you get in, or you get out what you put in sometimes. And so, Dennis, to your question there about what what's the benefit to the communities? A couple of things I'd like to reference. You saw Dr. Margaret Stout had posted earlier about the Moving Ahead Together Community Development Policy and Practice Program. That is one where there is this collaboration between the community, extension, public administration, where they leave with a plan, right? And we then help them work the plan. There's success stories that Margaret could share from Summersville and Hamlin and West Union, now Beckley. So another one that I'd like to just reference, I posted a link down there for Monforest Towns. And that was a broad spectrum for WVU to engage in this transdisciplinary approach with the community. And to the point, what Chris said earlier, with the community, not for, not prescribing, right? And so they went into the community, and you can see there's a little bit of a process timeline there, where they basically got the community to develop its shared vision, or communities. It's not it's not one, multiple communities to share their vision, right? And to then have a collective vision that we could work toward. They're doing similar work in Elk River area, thinking about how do we actually promote these resources. So, it's the long and the short of it is we need to be cognizant of our design and make sure that those stakeholders are at the table through the entire process. And don't make promises of what they will get out of it. Okay, that's really important because we don't know. I mean, there are times where our best efforts do not ultimately yield the results we hoped for. But if we can rely on the fact that, number one, we're operating with integrity, that we are maintaining and committed to inclusivity, then we will have strong relationships regardless of what those outcomes are. And that helps the community become stronger as a community, and also helps with resilience, because when there are those disappointments or challenges, then we're still a community, right? And so what's the next thing that we can do? And honestly, if we can engage in with our communities, teach them community engagement and community development, the goal is that maybe someday they, in some respects, don't need us. They want us, but they could still operate, right? If something happens, they don't need to call, a Jared Anderson or Chris Plein or Dennis Scott. They don't call me, but they won't need to call someone to come back in. They can take care of those opportunities and efforts themselves.
You hit the nail on the head, Tony. I mean, that's really what when thinking about this question, oftentimes I'm working in communities that haven't really done the planning process either ever or since the 1970s or 60s. And so I think the first sort of environment is, what do we need to do? You tell us, Jared, what do we need to do? How do we do this? And I think it's really important to understand that these processes take time. And nothing to me is better than, Jared, we don't really need your help anymore. We've got this. We're already starting to address our high priority goals and objectives. And so if I were to summarize it into one word, and it's nuanced, is sort of an empowerment, taking control of their community through this process. And so the calls become less, the emails become less, and they start to take control and ownership of the process by which we may have assisted in helping start, but they're in control. And that's really, in terms of success stories, that's really what we're looking for, is sort of that self-dependency. Obviously, we'll still be WVU will still be a resource, and questions will come up, but you'll start to see when we start to see that, I haven't heard from that community in a while, and call up and they're like, oh yeah, we're doing that goal and objective. We just started, working with a couple of organizations. That is music to my ears. It is. It really is. And so I think, Tony, you nailed it. When they stop calling, it's maybe not always a good thing, but sometimes it can be a really good thing.
Excellent. Those are great suggestions. And Chris, thank you so much for the recommendations for the book, Grassroots Engagement and Social Justice Through Cooperative Extension. As you can imagine, when we're doing this work, we ask a variety of scholars to serve on these type of panels. And one of the editors and authors we've actually invited for future panels. So Chris and I didn't have an opportunity to even talk about that, but it just shows how keyed in he is to this work. So really appreciate you promoting that and others' work on the call today. For information about Mon Forest Towns, for instance, Doug Arbogast is on the call. We see some chat going back and forth about connections that are forming across campus. So that's exactly what this discussion today is for. So talking about communities and what's mutually beneficial, for them. You've touched on it a little bit, but do you have any suggestions for making this work more accessible to communities? We've heard about a lot of specific projects. We've put some links in the chat, but are there ways to make these community conversations and plans more accessible for folks? Have you seen any successes with externally facing websites or social media? Because as Chris already alluded to, there's communities of place and there's sort of communities of practice, and there are emerging virtual communities. So what do you have to offer about those sort of successes virtually?
You know, there's a couple of things to think about. Opportunities often result when there's a convergence of priorities from different sources, okay? And, you know, I'm looking at the group that we have here today, and I'm seeing folks like John Deskins. I'm seeing folks from our health sciences campus, both here at WVU and outside of WVU across the state. And one of the things that strikes me is that there is a prioritization now for translational research and for getting word out to our communities. And that a lot of what we do is helping to translate our findings for those in communities. And so I think that's a very important thing that we are doing here at WVU quite intentionally with, and I'm just looking at some of the folks here today, knowing that these folks do that. The other thing is that increasingly national funders like the National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health are encouraging scholars to have a public-facing aspect of the work that they're doing. And this is called public education and outreach. And so the public education and outreach priorities that now we are seeing in major grants across fields, the natural sciences like physics, all the way through health sciences, you name it, emphasizes the fact that the work that folks are doing in research should also have a public-facing aspect of it. So that physicists, for example, who are examining the stars through radio astronomy, have programs to work with kids in elementary schools and summer programs like 4-H to help them become oriented towards STEM, to introduce a whole new generation of kids of many different backgrounds to this field. And so there's a car going by. Sorry, there's any background noise. But the idea that even federal funders are giving greater attention to public education and outreach is very important. And we've seen some really neat examples of that here in West Virginia. The other thing is that we do have the opportunities to talk to folks and to be very intentional, I would say, in briefing and discussing our findings with our communities, however they're defined. And I think there is an intentionality involved in that of actually working with and communicating the results to our communities. And I'll share just one quick story. Many, many years ago, I was part of a multidisciplinary team here at West Virginia University, and we were working with the Department of Health and Human Resources, and we were looking at the impacts and consequences of welfare reform in our state. And through our Institute of Public Affairs and through others at WVU, we produced a number of analyses and reports basically on the experiences of those individuals in West Virginia who had received public assistance. We also looked at the impact and consequences for those who were managing these systems at the frontline level in the counties across our state. Once we finished our studies and reports and we provided them to leadership in Charleston, one of the commissioners in Charleston said, "This is great, but now you all have to go out and talk to the frontline staff across the state." And I remember that one of my favorite engagement experiences was going across the state and going to various regional offices of the Department of Health and Human Resources and talking about our findings with the frontline staff. And so some intentionality about working with folks to get the word out, meeting face to face. Now in this, as you were saying, Dennis, in this virtual age, hosting a website, doing a blog, encouraging panel discussions that include not only folks who did the research, but folks who were partners in that research. All that becomes important. Thanks.
So, it's sort of like doing the other side of this, where, gone are maybe the days of you could just do a paper-based survey and that would be all the information you need, right? A lot of times we have to engage in multi-method research design. Well, that's the same plan that you need when you're disseminating. And I think Chris addressed that really well. One thing to think about is, how are you going to drive that traffic? And, Chris was referencing some of that. What's going to be your hook to get people interested in it? You're going to hear me mention extension probably in almost every answer, but reach out to those faculty members in the communities that that matter to you, because they can connect with others who might have interest, or community leaders. Heck, they could even host, for instance, if you wanted to do a community conversation, it might be part of some panel discussion that they put together. But there are lots of things, there are lots of different approaches here, depending on what it is and who you're trying to reach. So there's no one size fits all with this. Maybe the second recommendation I would have for you is, if you can learn Insta, which is the short for Instagram, or TikTok, or whatever the emerging, social media crazes are. Now, granted, a lot of times that might just be your youth. But the youth can always tell other people about it too. So you got to just think broad spectrum. Where do people get their information now? Because it's not just the local newspaper, right? It's not just a local news station. It's not just Facebook. It's not just, a static website. It really does require sort of a multi-method approach to dissemination.
I feel like I'm just kind of agreeing with the Chris and Tony, and trying to see where I can kind of fit in a little bit. But I mean, it's all great stuff. It totally, the greatest successes we've had have been a multimedia, multi-time, sort of different ways of asking questions. You can't, like you said, you can't just do a paper survey anymore. We found that the best way to get the word out is just to use as many platforms as possible. And maybe that's even saying the same thing, just in different ways. And so social media has become really important. One of the ways that we found that was really kind of almost by accident, but we found that we got a lot of great input and feedback and got the word out. And it's not always possible, is to piggyback on existing events. And what I mean by that is, one of the very first things that we did as a clinic is we went to Bridge Day, because we were working with Fayetteville. Well, I mean, you're getting everything there, right? And then we did it in Philippi with Blue Gray Days, which is a big event for Philippi, and we've done it numerous times. These events are going to happen. These events are well established. Sometimes it's difficult because a lot of times they're on the weekends. So a lot of, at least my students don't want to give up their weekends. But they can be great venues to not only gauge people coming in for the weekend from maybe all over the state or all over the region or all over the country, but also folks that are there just celebrating. And the key is to understand that they're not there to do a 50-minute long survey. They're not there to sit at your table and talk to you. You've got to design it in a way that people would be willing to participate somewhat. And we've just found that that's kind of a unique thing. We've even done science fairs, like at a high school. We went to, they've had a science fair, and we've just been kind of outside, soliciting stuff, because that's where you're going to find the parents. That's where you're going to find the students. And again, you've got to be respectful of the fact that they're not there necessarily to participate in this community development project. But these are voices that we probably wouldn't, if we're being quite frank, we wouldn't get them at a planning commission meeting. And so we've just had to be very creative and to piggyback off of events that have already been there. And we've had great success with that. But it does take some planning. It doesn't work in all communities, but it might be an avenue by which you can get a lot of good qualitative data and maybe even some quantitative data.
Thanks. These are great points, and I see there are more. I can't really keep up with the chat as much, but I really appreciate everybody for providing links in real time to what everybody's saying. It's great, and we will definitely follow up with a list of resources as well. So we've been talking a lot about the positive aspects of this work, both for folks internally here looking through things from an institutional lens, as well as the mutually beneficial aspects of this work for community partners. But I'd be remiss if I didn't really talk about some of the obstacles or barriers that we might have to this work. And we know, frankly, that there are barriers to this work, both internally and externally. So I'll toss that out there, whoever wants to talk about these issues, because it's part of uncovering how we can do better at this work. And maybe you have some thoughts on this, and maybe others on the call can also link to the discussion in the chat. So what obstacles or barriers have you experienced, or has everything just been easy for you, Chris? It's all just been an easy path to do this type of work over the years.
Dennis, this is the hardest question. I think we all face is that there's a couple of, let's parse this out, and I'm sure Tony and Jared will want to join in as well. How do we structure engagement at a university so that, one, we have the resources to pursue it, and two, that the work is recognized and validated? This is not a new issue. Okay, so, back in 1999 or so, the Kellogg Commission on the Future of State and Land Grant Universities, produced a seminal report on the engaged university and the importance of engagement. And WVU was actually one of the pioneer institutions in taking up this. And so in the early 2000s, we worked with other universities to try to look at how do you facilitate engagement, primarily by structuring the process of recognition and job assignment and workload at the university, so that we can engage with communities and engage with communities of all kinds. I think we've established that today, okay? And so one is this challenge of how do you recognize this work within the academic sphere? And this is an ongoing challenge. And I'm going to pop in a couple of resources here just to show how long this has been going on as a challenge. But the thing I want to focus on, and Dennis, you mentioned it in my bio, I really am a student of higher education across the country. And so what I'm saying is not specific to WVU, but WVU is part of this, but it's a broader question. And that is, as the nature of higher education changes, are we going to encounter more challenges to the work that we do with communities, the work that we do in engagement? So, for example, is there enough capacity at universities to do this work? As universities increasingly across the country turn to part-time faculty, will there be the faculty ranks to be able to engage and sustain these partnerships over time? Do we have the resources, the funding to carry out our public mission? Because much of this work that we do, everybody, as we know, is part of our mission. It's not generated by grants. It's not generated by the monetary aspects, or if it is, it's just enough basically to cover the cost. And so in many ways, we are at an inflection point in higher education in the United States. And that is, after 20 or 25 years or so of truly embracing the engagement spirit in higher education, which includes not only land-grant universities, but higher education in general, we are now facing some pretty existential challenges in terms of the funding of higher education and the way that higher education structures its work. So I would say that that is an important thing for us to keep in mind as we move forward, is do we have the capacity, and we do have the capacity, but how are our capacity be strained by these constraints that I've just talked about? How do we further refine efforts to validate and to recognize the work that faculty of all kinds, all of our university, engage in with this work? So I'll start with that, and then Jared, Tony, leave it to you.
So one of the barriers or obstacles is not necessarily, I think, a bad thing. It's just something that we as a university community can do better on, and that is and this isn't every community, but some of the communities that I've worked in, there are other folks affiliated with WVU also working in the community, and so sometimes, and from the community's perspective, sometimes they're like, you guys are all WVU, you guys all know what's going on, without realizing that, this is a huge university, we're all doing our own things, and we've got specific mandates for our projects and our grants. And so, this kind of, especially when you're talking about a small community with a finite amount of volunteers or people that are involved, is that there can be, I haven't seen it very often, but I've seen it a few times, where there's almost a meeting burnout. They're getting inundated with, again, I think it's not malicious at all. I think it's all good natured. I think it's all, trying to move the community in a positive way. But we've seen sometimes where there's confusion as to, like, well, we just met with the university last week. There's another meeting. What is this the same thing? And so that's been something that we can work through. And again, I think it's a good problem to have, because it means that we're utilizing our resources in various communities that have either asked or otherwise willing to participate in various projects. And so it's just one of those things where it's sometimes we just need to do a better job of communicating once. And again, it hasn't really been an issue once we've figured it out, like, oh, we just need to talk to this person in this school or this person in that school. We'll work together. But a better understanding at the onset, and I'm not sure I have the answer for that, other than just, we need to continue to talk about things and to let people know that we're starting this project or this project. But that's been a kind of a minor thing, and like I say, I think it's a good problem, because I know that there's other resources working in that community and helping it to achieve its goals and objectives.
A challenge is getting everyone to the table, or getting everyone's perspective. We talk about reaching people where they are, but some people either, one, feel disenfranchised. So what does my perspective or contribution matter anyway? So why be involved? Why come out to that community meeting, kind of thing? The other can really impact us, because it's the idea of who are we actually missing? Because if we're not cognizant of who's not at the table, then we're not really realizing who might we not be equitably reaching. So if we're talking about equitable collaboration, you always have to look at who is not represented in that group, right? Because those voices may be extremely powerful. Jared referenced that earlier, but you're not hearing them. So how do you get them to talk story, if you will? So that's a barrier there. And Chris talked about the imagined past, for instance. And sometimes it is well, WVU was here before and nothing came of that, and maybe that's true, or maybe it's only an imagined truth. So as Jared was mentioning, helping people understand what your goals are is really important. But I think the thing about the multi-method approach can help us overcome some of those. And then, of course, building those relationships and recognizing that relationships are the conduit to those voices that you won't reach yourself. Approach it sort of like 6 degrees of separation. Right? So if you want to reach Black or African-American leaders in McDowell County. How are you going to do it from Morgantown? You better think about your 6 degrees of separation, right? So a good place to start, again, would be the extension service, right? Click on that McDowell County link and see who is there that you can connect with and who do they know. But I think that's something that's a barrier for us. That one, helping people understand that, yes, their perspective is valuable and valued, right? And that two, that we're not just there to, West Virginia is very familiar with extractive economies. We're not there just to extract from them. What we're actually doing, our goal is to actually include them and help their community build.
Excellent. Thank you for bringing up those points. We really need to be mindful not to be just another extractive industry coming in, as was mentioned before, just to do research for our own sake, our own promotion and tenure. It has to be mutually beneficial for our community partners. And with an eye to understanding different perspectives and wanting to have chance for others to give buy-in, we do have a few more minutes left. So there have been some comments and questions in the chat. But I would like to open it up. If there are participants that have a specific question or comment, something that they really wanted to learn today, just feel free to unmute or type a question in the chat, and we'll try to get to that. If not, we have plenty of other things that we've talked about discussing that we could wrap up with, but just want to make sure that folks feel that their questions or comments are addressed as best we can today. If not, as Melissa mentioned in the chat, we'll be following up with additional resources. So any questions from any of the participants? Always feel free to type a question in the chat. If not, I'll just sort of pose sort of a big picture final question to the panelists that has to do with sustainability of impact. We've talked about the time, the relationship building, the community connections, trying to communicate, as well as listen, as Jarrett said. But what are some other ways that you have really approached the concept of sustainable impact? And what are some ways that scholars can sort of document the short, medium, and long-term impacts? We often hear about low-hanging fruit, or in community development, start with the petunias is an old saying, to start with the beautification project, something that can easily be done as a short-term impact. Do you have other ideas for how to document these impacts?
Dennis, it's a tough question, and one is how do we acknowledge both positive impacts and impacts that maybe are not so positive, which Tony talked about. So I think it's important for us to keep in mind. I guess my concluding observations would be of two kinds. First, in terms of documenting success or impact or sustainability, one wonders, what is the half-life of a contribution? What is the half-life of a research effort? What is the half-life of going in and working with the community for a weekend and helping them envision community development? And I think we have to have a bit of humility about that, our work is contributing to work that the community is leading, not us. And so for the first part of that is to recognize that we're contributing ideally to the well-being of individuals first, and those individuals make up community. I've had the privilege of being at West Virginia for quite a while, in West Virginia for quite a while, and at West Virginia University for quite a while. And Tony was talking about the Mon forest towns and the great work that Doug Arbogast has been doing. And I drive through those communities and I remember some of those communities when they were in need of vitalization or revitalization because of economic conditions. And I remember visiting those communities with community design team efforts back in the 90s and early 2000s. And those communities look much different now than back then. But I could hardly claim that the community design team was responsible for their success, as much as we can't claim that any specific activities that we do now is responsible for their success. But we know that we're helping to make contributions for those communities and those individuals to lead success. As a teacher, and it's so cool because I'm looking around and I'm seeing a number of my former students here today, which is great. It's just maybe been the best part of today. But as a teacher, I can't measure my success in their success. I can only say that I had a role to play, but that their success is their success. And just like that's the case with individuals and with communities as well. And Cynthia, it's great to see you, by the way. And but the other aspect of all this is that we have to be very mindful about our impacts. Maybe our impact isn't so great, but maybe our impact can have consequences. When I first started getting into this work, I would read various guidebooks and handbooks and reflections. And the credo was used from the health community that, you know, folks who are doing community engagement should first do no harm. And so that is a very important thing to keep in mind. First, do no harm. But never, ever assume that if you take the posture of first, do no harm, never think that you're indemnifying yourself from consequences in a community. Whenever we engage, and Jared, I know you know this, and Tony, you know this, and everybody who's done this, whenever we engage with community, whenever we engage with others, we create disruption. We change patterns merely by our presence. And so we have to be mindful of that. Definitely go in with the mindset of do no harm, but understand that does not indemnify the consequences of your actions. And when we do this work, think about the implications, think about the expectations, think about the different perspectives that have been offered today about how we approach this work with a sense of self-awareness. So thanks, Dennis.
So I would just follow up with that to say there are lots of tools that you can use to measure longitudinal impacts. I'm not here to reference those. But what I will say is, on the one hand, you have to think about what you hope to achieve, but then also when you connect with the community, what they hope to achieve. If you can see that the community is itself, right, picking up on what you're laying down, so to speak. In other words, if they are developing their own capacity because of your contributions, that's a win. You, as Chris said, you will not be able to take credit, and you should not, for everything that happens there. But understand that in a lot of ways, it's sort of like Malcolm Gladwell's tipping point. Your contributions can add, right, so that it helps that community tip. And so, Chris, despite the fact that the community design team might not be able to take credit for all that's happening in Montforest Towns, it's a push in that direction that really has transformed that and revitalized those communities.
Yeah, and my final thoughts are that the process by which you work in these communities, you may have a specific deliverable. It may manifest itself as a report or a study or a white paper or what have you. But don't forget about the process. The process can be just as impactful, if not more impactful, to the community as the end goal, the end objective. In fact, a lot of times, I'll write a comprehensive plan, and it could be a really great comprehensive plan, and I hope that it's useful. And I think that the community does take it to heart and utilizes it. But I'm also during that time really cognizant and trying to be as aware as I can about what that process meant to that community. What did it mean for them to go through sometimes a multi-year process where they met every month on the first Tuesday at 7 o'clock? What did that mean for them? And do they have, and through this process, do they have the resources that they need once this plan is done to start to implement the comprehensive plan and to realize their goals and objectives? And so while we as a sort of an academic community might be geared towards the deliverable, I would caution everyone to occasionally step back and look at the process by which you're getting to that end deliverable, and to make sure that that in and of itself can be very impactful and have long-term impacts, we hope. So the process sometimes is almost, if not more important than the end deliverable. So I'll leave you guys with that.
Thank you so much, Jared. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, all participants. I'm going to give the last word to the Assistant Dean Director of the Center for Community Engagement, Christy. We've got so much going on at the center. We've got a community volunteer fair going on today. Maybe you could wrap things up for us, Christy, and talk about the fact we're sending out information, and thanks to all the participants for the next A series.
Absolutely. I could not be more excited and proud and just, blown away by all of the folks at our institution who I knew anecdotally were passionate and engaged. And now I'm seeing this come to life. So I'm really excited. I do want to throw out the core to a lot of my programming and my mission and vision is our student learning on campus. Please don't forget that you are building foundations that we need to help our students engage in. So the same lessons that you're learning about community respect and community engagement, we need to use those opportunities to teach our students. So we want them to, we know they know the numbers of West Virginia because they'll tell you quickly how low we are on numbers. Let's let them know some names too. So anytime you can bring them with you to these community experiences, use this as an opportunity. But again, thank you. This is brilliant work. It continues to happen. And we are here really to bring that all out to you guys. I see our Dean jumped in. So Dean, I definitely, anything or?
Just basically to say, I wish I could have joined earlier, but we're working furiously on budget things like any other college and unit. But I'm glad that these many people joined today. This is very exciting. And I hope that you are getting something valuable out of this experience. I am so proud of our community engagement team, and I hope that together we're going to make a bigger team for this entire university and really put all of knowledge to work with those partners all across the world who can actually enhance what we do and give us an opportunity to enhance what they do together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Dina Tiles. Please look for a follow-up email and additional workshops in the future on community engaged research, as well as building outcomes around the engagement experience. Thank you so much.